good night, and God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.
Bringing a character back from the dead. Death fake-outs. Is it okay? When is it something that can be done to further advance the story, and when does it become a pivotal spot where the audience throws their hands up in a state of confusion and disgust? A mistake is often made where we allow the most prominent examples of something to become a rule for what can or cannot be done within a story. There are also different levels of severity when it comes to this type of thing, whether it's a small offense or shatters the meaning to your story entirely, and thus spitting in the face of anyone who's invested time into it. I think there are cases that are okay, but there are a few things that need to be considered. First, we need to address the death before we can get into the revival or survival of the character. The death of a character varies a bunch, given the role they serve within the story, the tone of the story itself, and how much of an attachment to that character the author is able to create. An important character death is brought out in the climax of the story or the inciting incident, whether it is sacrificial or the antagonist getting the best of whoever it is. These are moments that really pull us into the story completely. We are emotionally invested in seeing the outcome of the character, resulting in a final message or a grand sacrifice, which usually stays with our protagonist and pushes the story forward, thus making us hate whoever is responsible for this character's death, or in the outcome of it all, making the battle that occurred throughout an arc or a story carry more weight. In these moments, we are fully immersed and the magic of a story comes to life, where we feel real emotions for characters that aren't real. But what happens when a character is brought back or survives? One Piece often gets critiqued for not killing off characters, and Pell is often used as an example of his sacrifice to carry the bomb into the sky for the climax of Alabasta, is then nullified when he turns out to be okay. I don't think this deserves a pass per se, but for the most part Pell is not a super important character within the series, but it does numb what should have been an emotional send-off, thus giving the struggle of Alabasta more weight in retrospect. A similar issue does occur in Skypiea and other instances in One Piece, but One Piece did a good job with a far more important character in the story, Ace, a beloved character and a fan favorite who is arguably the most important character to the protagonist Monkey. I'm trolling, important to Luffy. And his death is in the climax of Marineford, one of the most pivotal arcs in all of One Piece, and a huge moment for Luffy as well. If there is a list of the most emotional moments in One Piece, this would without a doubt be up there. If this man was to be brought back to life, I couldn't think of a reason why to do so other than to get Oda out of a hole that he wrote himself in. But I highly doubt that would happen. But why would that be bad? You see, that entire arc is spent trying to prevent that outcome, and it's a big turning point for the main character of the story. That scene carries weight for the impact it has on the story and the feelings it created to the audience. If Oda was to bring Ace back to life, the means to do so have not been well enough established, and the pros of whatever you could do with Ace's character post-revival would not outweigh the cons of destroying a moment like that. What was once a strong moment of immersion now has become the opposite, because instead of forgetting we are witnessing events made up by someone, we are now actively aware that someone is writing this and isn't doing a very good job, ruining our ability to get invested in that moment or ever again for that story. A moment that really sticks with me in a negative way is Byakuya's death being undone, and I think that's how I imagine I would feel if Ace was brought back, but I think with Ace it would be 10 times worse. Byakuya is a character we witness grow and change, and his best moment as a character comes in his death. Easily one of my favorite moments in that arc and in all of Bleach, or would have been had he not been brought back to life like it was no big deal. Apparently this happened due to death threats Kubo was getting from Bleach fans, which shows that many times fans need to shut up and it's best for authors not to always listen to the fans. I felt like a clown for getting all emotional after that scene, and that's the last thing a person should feel when getting invested into a character. The reaction also to Byakuya being brought back to life was far too casual given how serious his death was. I remember there being a pretty egregious moment in Black Clover with the whole quote about, since it's magic, we could do whatever the hell we want, but in all honesty, I'm missing a bit of the context surrounding that moment, so I won't delve into it too much. But I knew people were going to mention it in the comments, so I'll throw it out there. And another series that has a pretty interesting relationship with death is Dragon Ball, which I think plays it very well and sometimes gets really close to messing up the line, and at times just really does. When Krillin is killed for the second time, it results in Goku going Super Saiyan, which is arguably the most iconic moment in anime, since he cannot be brought back with Earth's Dragon Balls. But the loophole is the Namekian ones are a different set and abide by different rules. I would argue that's an example that works given it's something that's set up for the entire arc, and Goku wouldn't have been aware of the Namekian Dragon Balls granting 3 wishes, and they apply to a different rule set. Frieza surviving, however, could be seen as inexcusable, but that is immediately rectified to give a new character a great introduction, and that's Trunks. There are examples of death needing to be a bit more strict in Dragon Ball, but I would point to these two circumstances as times as it was done well within the plot of the story. The Frieza one not so much, but I would argue if none of the characters that he killed were brought back and Goku had actually died, then it would have been more of a problem, which even then Goku surviving the explosion in Namek is a little bit of a question mark, but don't get it twisted, the Dragon Ball franchise is a bit of a habitual line stepper, if you will. Currently, the hottest series in anime and manga, Jujutsu Kaisen, is going through an interesting phase. If you don't want to be spoiled in regards to this, then I suggest skipping to the next segment as I've marked the video. I personally think everything going on in the overall story is a bit of a mess, or at least has some loose ends that need to be handled soon so the story can come to a satisfactory conclusion, especially with Itadori. Something I honestly predicted a year ago when Gojo entered the story again after being sealed. His fight with Sukuna was a great moment for both characters, especially Gojo, even though since it has been a bit yikes. Seeing the predictable switch-up has been rather funny, but it's the recent chapter 261 where after Gojo was Darth Mauled a while ago, he came back. However, the context surrounding it is Yuta giving up himself or his brain to use Gojo's body. I think we have to wait to see how much this can be passable, since I do believe this needed a bit more context beforehand outside of it being done to Geto and then a flashback in the exact same chapter. Since it is possible, the thing that is going to be a huge turning point for the protagonist side, and what this really means for the end of the story, because if Yuta ends up being completely okay and normal after this, then it makes the sacrificial nature of his words sound pointless. Still, I can understand the sentiment where this feels a bit too convenient given the gauntlet of characters that Sukuna has been running through. I always said I felt like the issue was him and Gojo were so head and shoulders above everyone else that there wasn't a proper transition for a third character to give a clean transition when the time came to defeat Sukuna. Even if that's the end goal for the story at this point, who knows. Nonetheless, this is going to be interesting, given that this is what really sparked the idea for the video, but I do think the aftermath is going to allow me to give a far more fair assessment of all of this, instead of all of the hyperbolic statements about JJK no longer being a good story. Although JJK and the fandom and its ability to assess what JJK's strengths and weaknesses are as a story has always been kind of questionable to me, but that's a whole other video. Because correct me if this is an incorrect observation, but it feels like there was so much stock put into the potential and future of characters instead of what the story was actually presenting with said characters. Especially considering that JJK has a lot of different moving parts, therefore certain characters won't get the focus that everyone thought they would, but again, that's a discussion for a whole other video. The more a character's death was instrumental into the progression of the plot by impacting a primary character in the story or a primary plot point, the more you have to do to justify their death being undone. The means to bring that character back have to be believable and established in the laws of said world or believable to that character's abilities. Oftentimes, the means to bring said character back are not believable. On top of that, one has to be careful to not ham-fist a twist at the expense of the story that has been established that adds nothing to the characters involved. I'll use two examples from one franchise. Imagine following this franchise for almost your entire life. The first films come out and establish an evil emperor that is trying to turn the beloved hero to the dark side, the same way he did to his father. But he fails, and so he tries to kill our hero. The evil father, in his final moments, redeems himself and throws the old coot down an endless hole before the space station then blows up, killing the once evil father and emperor for good. Now, imagine you were in the next generation of people like myself, who grew up watching the origins of this evil father, when he was the hero of the story, and you see how elaborately the emperor planned everything and is instrumental into the corrupting of said hero, therefore making the previous films have a beautiful full circle moment where multiple character arcs are accomplished, leaving an emotional and satisfying finish. Now imagine years later, a new group of heroes emerge, and to give them a threat we have to respect since the previous one you tried to establish turned out to be a joke, you bring back this emperor from the dead, and your line to introduce this is somehow Palpatine return. Now effectively spitting on the entire conclusion of 3 of the best characters ever in order to force meaning into this new hero that you haven't developed properly, or at the bare minimum given a compelling arc. Even later, when a more logical explanation is given to justify this character being brought back, given their abilities, it has done more harm than good by pulling us all out of the story and making the grand sacrifice essentially be for nothing. Especially since for the antagonist himself, it does nothing, in comparison to in the Clone Wars where Maul is brought back, and goes from a silent menace with a cool fight scene to a fully fleshed out antagonist that goes throughout an entire character arc of his own, thus bringing back a character that had so much potential to be utilized and is without ruining a key moment moment for the narrative or the entire franchise. Given that I think, even though yes, Darth Maul is responsible for Qui-Gon's death, I think Qui-Gon and his purpose as a character is a lot more tied to Anakin than Maul, if you will. So even though one could look at Maul being brought back after being cut in half and falling down a chute as ridiculous, him being alive out of pure hatred and further showing what a character fueled by hate to the very end, as well as be a part as the best the Clone Wars series has to offer. I would say the pros outweigh whatever cons you could throw at it. The same cannot be said for the revival of Palpatine. There was little to Maul, and when he was brought back, he was made into one of the best characters in the franchise. There was a lot to Palpatine, who was already one of the best characters in the franchise, and bringing him back ultimately soured the conclusion of Vader and Luke's characters, which took 6 movies spanning over 30 years. The buildup of a character and their growth all the way to the climax can take anywhere from 10 to over hundreds of chapters, and the means to bring them back do not have the same amount of thought and time put into them, making their revival feel like a convenience to the author and not something that was actually planned out for the benefit of the story. Edo Tensei and Naruto, for the most part, was a solid implementation, as it was a concept introduced well before it was implemented fully at the end of the story. It could be critiqued for which characters it shouldn't have brought back or bringing back too many characters, but I think it did good for some of the characters, and characters like Itachi and the Hokage benefited greatly, being that it gave Itachi and Sasuke their most emotional scene together, giving more proper context to Itachi's character, and allowed for the Hokage to give information that would have otherwise not been known. Information that directly adds to the theme of the cycle of hate, and how it's something that runs far deeper than just the last generation. Edo Tensei itself is based on the idea of sacrifice, and the characters that are brought back do not stay permanently. Even at the end of Pain Assault arc, it's required a sacrifice to undo the damage Pain did, being his own life. But I could see the argument that it's not a justifiable trade-off in the mind of the audience. Still, these moments come off a lot better than when Naruto all of a sudden gained the power to save my guy, who used a technique which had been established for far longer than the ability of Naruto's new powers, and that is the 8 gates would kill him. Even in the example with Pain, which I think could be justified far more, the issue with bringing back a character in such a manner is that the means to do so usually break rules previously established in the world, and the audience is now watching them be casually broken and at times for no real reason at all. Seriously, other than yippee, my guy is alive, what benefit did it have to save his life? Other than to show off Naruto's new powers? I feel like there was a much better way that could have been done. The death of these characters are sad, intense, and sacrificial. Meanwhile, the revivals feel far too convenient, casual, and easy. It is a combination of pulling the readers out of the story and making it hard to reinvest into the new stuff, while also destroying what was established when you bring someone back that was pivotal, especially in death. Our hatred for antagonists is also fucked with in a way that serves no benefit. The reason we hate endings like Promised Neverland and Tokyo Revengers. Yes, we are happy to see the characters we love be okay, but not when we are already emotionally invested so much into the consequences that were laid out by their actions or the actions of an antagonist we hate. It makes it feel like, what was the point to all the time we put into this and followed these characters, and what weight does the message have to offer when in the end there was no real conflict or struggle or any sort of loss for it? It's as if the feeling of stakes that was carefully crafted is now thrown out of the window. The very thing that made us invested and gave us that feeling of a rush is just now gone because the author is too scared to kill off a fan favorite, or just simply wrote themselves into a corner they can't find a way out of. I think there are cases where a character surviving or being brought back to life can work. There just needs to be a lot of consideration into the explanation given to justify it. A loophole that has been established in the rules of the story and whether or not it actually adds more to that character in specific or to the story as a whole. It's like a plot twist. You need to show hints of it before you actually pull off the twist, so it doesn't feel like it comes out of nowhere. And it doesn't feel like some whimsical way to solve problems the author wrote themselves into while killing off an emotional send-off that should have been left as is. It's almost like a scale that should be balanced. If the death of a character was sacrificial and emotional, then the means to bring them back to life should also feel the same way. And again, this all really depends on what type of story you're creating, right? Like, for example, a comedy is going to have very different rule sets and what it can get away with than an action series that takes itself seriously. The goal should be for it to add to the story in some way without completely messing up the scale and doing more damage to the foundation of your story. Similar to the principle of making sure it fits the story as a priority over what's cool. The audience is far from dumb, for the most part, and they're smart enough to know when it's a good idea and when it's a silly moment lacking in creativity. Let me know your thoughts on this type of discussion, what examples you think are good moments of this being done, and what moments you think are just terrible and should have never happened. And as always, make sure you subscribe, like, as well as support the channel if you want to. I have a Patreon where you can join the Discord server where we've been doing watch parties. This has been The Masked Man. Hope everyone has a blessed rest of the day, and peace.